US President Donald Trump, while announcing the India-US trade deal, made a startling claim that India will stop buying Russian oil and pivot to Venezuelan and US crude. Russia claims India hasn't stopped buying oil. India said, "We have multiple sources." But amid all of this, who actually does India purchase oil from? Let's answer that question. India is one of the world's largest crude oil importers, relying on foreign oil for about 85 to 88% of its needs. So in 2024 to 2025, Russia was often India's single largest supplier, accounting for roughly 30 to 35% of imports. Now these volumes sometimes about 1.2 to 1.7 million barrels per day. The second largest source, Iraq, about 18 to 20%, Saudi Arabia at 13 to 15%, and then you have UAE at 8 to 10%. Again, I'll highlight this is data for 2024-25. So you've got that entire ranking there, with number one being Russia. Why does Russian oil then matter to India? Well, post-Ukraine war sanctions pushed Russia to offer deep discounts on crude, making it economically attractive for India's refiners. Indian refineries are configured to process heavier and sour crude, a category where Russian oil often fits well. And that's what boosts refining margins. Buying Russian oil helped India lower its energy import bill and secure supplies when global markets were tight. So Russian oil wasn't just about volume, it was also about affordability and refinery compatibility. So what does US have to say about this? The US has tied trade incentives like lower tariffs on Indian exports to reducing Russian oil imports. Trump explicitly linked these moves to weakening Russia's revenue base, especially in the context of the Ukraine war, and has repeatedly done so. Washington argues that cutting Russian oil buys undermines Moscow's ability to fund military actions and keeps global oil prices in check. And so US policymakers have repeatedly imposed tariffs on countries that import Russian crude, trying to isolate Russia economically. The pressure isn't therefore just diplomatic. It's also tied to trade leverage and global geopolitics. So can India ultimately replace Russian oil? Yes, but there are certain conditions that cannot be ignored. India can source more crude from America, from the Middle East, from Africa, and of course from Venezuela. And analysts say alternatives exist without severe disruption. Venezuelan crude is also heavy and sour, which I was referring to earlier. It's similar to Russian grades, so it's very much attractive for many Indian refiners. But switching suppliers involves huge logistics and pricing challenges. US crude is usually lighter, more expensive once freight is factored in. Also, exiting can be an issue because of the wind-down problem. Even if India decides to scale back Russian oil, it's not something that can happen overnight, as Trump suggests. Most crude purchases are governed by long-term supply contracts between Indian refiners and Russian producers, often running for several years. To break a contract will mean that there is a certain wind-down period, meaning buyers must either continue lifting agreed volumes or face penalties. Additionally, a sudden exit could also hurt India's credibility as a long-term buyer in global oil markets. So while yes, diversification is possible, going ahead and delinking yourself from Russian oil is a gradual process, not a switch off. And that's what I keep referring to, the wind down period becomes a major constraint for India. In short, India, yes, has the capacity to diversify, but it will take time, investment and favorable pricing, most importantly, to fully replace discounted Russian barrels. So far, there's no communication from India that suggests that there will be zero purchase of Russian oil.